This massive inflatable fabric in the middle of my shop that has been an eyesore has actually been surprisingly a massive request of you guys on whether or not you should purchase an inflatable paint booth. So I'm gonna make a short review for you real quick. This is by no way endorsed by any company. This is a completely unbiased review, and I'm gonna make it very short and simple. In order to paint in my shop, I needed some sort of booth because I recently painted my IS300 and the Miata. And while they both turned out well, they could have turned out better, not necessarily because of something I could have controlled. So here we go. This is actually the last time I'm gonna see this eyesore because I'm about to pack it back up. It's cool, it's convenient, but it has some flaws, and it might not be what you think. So, the inflatable paint booth, should you or should you not get one? And if you don't like the noise, that sucks. I've dealt with it for a month now, so that's helping you make an informed decision right there, right? Like I said, I've painted 2 cars now with this booth, in this booth, and I've learned a lot about it, and I feel like I can give you guys all the details you may need to know for you to make your own informed decision. I still have it, I think, linked in my Amazon store that's in the description if you're interested. They have multiple sizes, and short story is, it does work. I'll start with the pros. We'll do pros and cons of it, but I want to talk to you guys about my legit experience with really painting 2 cars that actually ended up turning out, for what it's worth, very good for where they were painted. How? Before you start, the reason why paint booths are cool is not just to prevent everything around you from getting overspray. Paint booths are neat because they use a system to pressurize the cabin, if you will, to push the paint outwards, upwards, and off of the car around you. And that's why you'll see a bunch of filters all around you, and that's why you'll see an extraction port where you can use an extractor. The whole point of a paint booth is not to just is not to prevent overspray from going everywhere, but it is to filter, for one, yes, but it also is to pressurize a confined space so that the paint particles have somewhere to go aside from just settling downwards. That's essentially the point of a paint booth. So I think the obvious answer for a pro of this is convenience. This thing can pack up into a box that's probably 3 feet by 2 feet by 2.5 feet or so. And you can store it when you're done with it if you can manage to pack it up. And that's exactly what I'm going to be doing today. And I don't honestly know how that process is going to be. So space utilization and convenience is awesome because you can put it not only in your garage, in your shop, or even outside, which is pretty cool. You can put it pretty much anywhere. Another pro is it has all the features that a standard paint booth has, just in a much more condensed, but also as a caveat, not as functional of a version. So it does have the mixing room, which is neat. I don't really think anybody uses a mixing room to mix, but it has a mixing room. It has a spot for your air hose that shouldn't really compromise the amount of pressure that's inside of it. And the main door that you have right here ends up being pretty secure. And if you are vertically challenged like I am, it's pretty hard to close it without grabbing the entire top, pulling it down, and then closing it. But it seems to have adequate ventilation, adequate extraction points, and they definitely touch on what's important about a paint booth. Aside from that, the pros is very easy to set up. It all comes in a box. Everything's included, so you have both of the fans that you need. It doesn't come with an extractor, which that's sort of a con, but it's everything that you need in a very condensed, simplified version of a paint booth that is probably, maybe, potentially not going to work for you, but maybe will. Another pro is it's easy to clean, especially depending on how close. You're assuming you're probably going to be using not just spray cans, but air compressor. You have compressed air. You can blow everything out, blow it away, and keep the floor as clean as possible. I'm trying to think of the pros because I don't really know if I have too many more. It comes with little hooks and stuff like that, I guess, if you want to use cheap little Walmart lights. We didn't use that, but it's interesting. They have a lot of features that I think they overthought to put in, but then they underthought a lot of the more important stuff. And so I guess we'll segue on to the cons. Again, I'm gonna keep this concise. I'm just gonna be completely honest about this. I don't think this booth works very well, out of the box at least. The way that it works is you have one fan that pressurizes the little tubes all around, inflates it. Then you have another fan that pressurizes or puts air into the mixing room behind me. That pressurizes that, goes through those filters, and then in turn pressurizes the sort of cabin, if you will. That's what I'll call it. What that does is it pushes air outward, and as you can see, it goes through, and it is effective to some extent. It's pushing through and hitting the filters, and then from that point, it's all the solvents and all the chemicals that are really bad for you. They go out of the booth and away, however you're extracting. But the thing is, I don't think the fans are, it's not that I don't think, the fans are not big enough, period. And the funny thing is, the way that they have it online to set it up, this is, I'm not picking on them, but this is just the one that I got. The Vevor tent shows the larger fan blowing up the booth and the smaller fan pressurizing. And that did not work at all. We had all of the overspray. There's barely any pressure in the booth. The booth should literally start bowing outwards with how much air is being pushed in there. And it didn't do that. We even had the extractor port tied up so that there was as little leakage as possible, but the fan just wasn't big enough. So we put the smaller fan to blow up the machine, and then the larger fan to pressurize the cabin. That still didn't work very well. So then I went to Harbor Freight and bought a sort of aftermarket extractor. That helped a little bit, but even at the end of the day, after all of that was said and done, it still wasn't enough pressure. And it made my life a lot harder with the booth, because after just about every single stage, I had to wet sand. That's not necessarily a bad thing, but when you're forced to do it, it can end up in different outcomes than you want. And especially when you're just doing paint, you have to be really careful, because if you're doing less than 1,000 grit, you can, depending on how heavy you spray the paint, you can lose your paint. You have to start all over again. And there were a few parts in the process of painting both cars where I had to completely start again because the booth wasn't working as properly as it should. Moving on from that, another caveat is lighting. So obviously it has all the hooks and stuff like that where you can use cheap lighting. What I don't understand is they have these really cool see-through pieces that obviously retain air really well on the sides. If you're in a shop, you need light from the top of the booth. Why not make the entire top of the booth see-through as well? Because then you could utilize all the light that's, even if you're outside, inside a shop, all your light is coming from above. And granted, you need to use lights on the side and stuff like that too, but it's weird. I don't know why they didn't use, and maybe there's a reason for that, but it doesn't really make much sense to me, because the more light you can get, the better. But obviously you need to use side lights when you're painting, because you can see a lot more imperfections when you're looking at it into the light that way. So the lighting was not great. It's pretty dark in the booth, and my shop is like aircraft hangar grade lighting. Like, it is bright in this shop. You can see my shop glowing from miles away at night if my doors are open. So even with that said, it was just hard to see. And so I think the lighting could have been better. Third, the fact that it didn't come with an extractor was weird and a bit concerning. Now, obviously, with these cheap little Chinese plastic fans that they have, they could have just given you one in reverse to extract out this little port that they give you and then blow it out somewhere else, but they didn't. But I did go to Harbor Freight. I bought like an $80 extractor, which I'll probably end up keeping because it's not a bad thing anyways, but an air extractor, they just didn't come with it. And that's important for these booths because it needs to either go out of the booth or it needs to go through the filters. And it wasn't doing either of those as it came in the box. And there was nothing I was missing from the packaging. It all came exactly how it was supposed to, and it was installed how it was supposed to. There's really only one way you can install it. So even with very professional painters being here and helping me set it up and sort of diagnose it, left for some pretty not so amazing results. But again, for the reason you're buying this, you're probably not looking for a perfect paint job. You might be painting a car between drift events and you don't really care, and you have to wet sand, or if the clear coat doesn't come out perfect, then whatever, this might be for you. What I think is one of the more important aspects of this is you are depending on electricity for not only for your fans working, but for them keeping your booth inflated. And so you are quite literally praying and hoping that your breaker will not get blown by all the power these fans are using. So this shop was built for massive amounts of power. It is always using power. I've got a massive compressor. I've got 220s everywhere. I've got 4 or 5 lifts and huge lights. It's made for this. And there was one time, actually 2 times, that we blew a breaker because it was on the similar circuit. And so dancing around that, we had to cater to the booth and make the shop ugly, and then we had to plug in lighting elsewhere, and we actually ended up having to get a massive 100-foot extension from my house so that we could run the extractor and another bigger fan to blow it out in the shop. And so it's all cool. The inflatable thing is nice, but you have to take your power needs into consideration. This is drawing a lot. 2 fans alone are a lot, but then you got to think you're going to be running a compressor. Your lights have to be on in the shop. You're going to be running multiple fans to get whatever air is out of the area, or whatever the fumes are out of the area. And then LEDs are fine, whatever, but there's just a bunch of random things that you just don't really consider. Even if you're running air conditioning, which that doesn't really affect everybody, but like you have very finite amount of power to use, and if you have a breaker issue, this booth in the middle of painting could just randomly turn off and deflate. And that's a caveat to any inflatable booth, I would say. And that's why I actually have a fallen trans jack in here, because I had it literally standing next to my cars just in case it did that. Which it did, and it did kind of help, but I ended up having to redo some clear coat and flow coating the car after, and that was a pain. And I think my last point is, so keeping the booth clean is the most important aspect of, I think, getting a clean finish on a car. Like all professional painters will tell you, it's all about the prep work, a lot less about the actual painting skill itself, because painting is easy. Anybody, especially when you're using modern day air guns, have the right wrist movement and stuff, you're gonna lay glass. Because of the dynamic of the floor, and I guess you could probably tie it out and extend it, but even with me tying it down to tires and fully extending in all directions, the floor was very odd, and you were constantly, even with the floor wet down, a lot of you guys will notice that the floor was wet as I was painting, and that's to make sure that particles, dust doesn't get kicked up as I'm walking. But because of the way that the floor is, it moves with your feet regardless. And so you're kicking up dust, you're kicking up water on accident, moving the hose, it'll fling up water just because the floor it moves as you're doing this whole thing. And so the moral of the story is, with all the caveats and with all the cons, there's only so good of a product that you can get with a booth like this. You can put a bunch of lipstick into a pig and continue to upgrade the fans, but it's like at some point, you might as well do something that's like use jacks or poles and all that kind of things to keep it up, and then really buy your own good extractor and then a nice fan to keep it pressurized. But the point of this is, all-in-one system, is it good? Yes. It will help you do the job that you're probably wanting to do, but even with the utmost care and the best prep we possibly could do, we still had a ton of issues, clear coat settling where it shouldn't have, and you'll see the cars. I'm gonna have to make some videos of wet sanding and fully detailing both cars, because it's just the way that the clear coat went up, came back down because it didn't pressurize. It gave the car a result that was undesirable, but also it's not the end of the world. And so if you're willing to put in a little bit of the extra work after the fact, sure, this might be the perfect deal for you. But just know that if you do buy it, it's important that you, for one, you know what you're doing, or you find some help for somebody that does know what you're doing, but switch the fans around, make sure the cabin is pressurized, the booth is pressurized, and make sure everything is as sealed as possible. The flaw of the design in this, though, you'll see all around little cracks and crevices. There's air leaking everywhere. And ideally, in a perfect world, you want a nice enough fabric and good enough seams to where you don't have to have a fan running to keep it inflated, but it's just gonna do that. The second you turn that fan off, this thing is going to fall down. I'm gonna clean it up, pack it up, and I'm gonna end up returning it. There's a fee to return it, but I'm not gonna use it again. If I'm going to paint something, I'm honestly either gonna do it in my garage with the right fans, which is crazy, or I'm just gonna rent a paint booth and go somewhere, use a friend's paint booth or something like that. So that's my take on it. A lot of people, and I do say a lot, it's a common thing to say, like, oh, I got a lot of DMs, but I have a lot of comments and people asking about like what my thoughts are about the inflatable paint booth. And you know what, for the $800 price point that you might get this one for, it might work perfectly for you, and it will do what you want it to do, I'm sure. It depends on your motives, and it depends on your desired outcome. Wouldn't paint a SEMA car in here, but a drift car, that's fine. So that's it. My advice for you guys today, be thankful for what you got, and just try and have the best mindset you can today in any way you approach things. Be intentional about your mood, about your outlook, etc. You can make or break your day, believe it or not. It's not always dependent on other people. Again, this is a Vivor tent, nothing against them, was not sponsored, no affiliation at all. There's many booths alike. I think I have it in my Amazon storefront that's in the description of the video. Victoria's been doing some affiliate stuff with that, but check it out, go ahead, it's right there. There's bigger and smaller, I think there's smaller booths, but there's much bigger ones, and I would hope that those come with bigger fans. If not, it's a problem. But subscribe, give this video a like, and I will see you guys next video. Peace.